Hey there, and welcome to Into the Terminal episode 32 at our brand new time, 12 p.m. Eastern. Uh, I forgot what I was saying. I'm Eric, the IT guy Hendricks, and joining me every episode is Mr. Scott McBrien.
Hey, everybody.
So today, in our new time slot, we're going to hang out and talk a little bit about one of my favorite utilities, Tmux. For those of you that don't know, Tmux it is short for a terminal multiplexer, which is really, really fancy language to say that you can actually run multiple processes, multiple views within within a single terminal session. So a lot of times I use this if I'm connecting into my home lab where I've got about a dozen servers or so. I can actually just have one SSH connection in and connect to all of my servers in one view. It's really great, and if you're running Red Hat Enterprise Linux, it's actually one of the supported packages. So for our example today, we're running RHEL 9.0, and all we have to do to get the tool installed is just to do a DNF install. Some of you may recall a program called Screen. That's still around, but if you're familiar with Screen, you kind of understand the purpose and the use case for something like Tmux.
And Screen is available in the Extra Packages for Enterprise Linux repository, which is a community-supported repo that we talked about in a previous episode.
Great point. Yeah. So Tmux is in the official base OS repository, and then Screen is available in EPEL or EPEL, depending on your preference. So now we've got Tmux installed. So continuing down this line of these commands are incredibly simple to use. All we have to do to start a session is just type in the command tmux. And you notice we have a session bar, or we have a status bar across the bottom. We've got our local terminal session in the top. So across the status bar, we have a session name there on the left with the square brackets, any windows that we have open, and then across the right is the host name and account that we're using, as well as the date and time. And we'll get into some features that will manipulate that status bar in the second half of the show. But for the most basic use cases, what we can do is why don't we create a vertical pane? So Tmux uses keyboard shortcuts almost exclusively. There's a couple of exceptions that you can use with a mouse, like clipboard management, but by default, the keyboard shortcut to interact with Tmux is the Control key and the B key together. That signals Tmux that you're giving it instructions as opposed to your terminal session. So if we do a Control B and then the percent key actually creates a vertical split. So if we do a Control B and percent, that splits our screen in two. And now I believe we can use our arrow keys to switch between the two panes, between left and right.
Yeah, so just like before, we need to use Control B to preface that the input that we're sending should go to Tmux and not to the shell. And then we use our arrow key to tell it which one to go to. So Control B and right arrow will move to the right side of the screen. Control B and left arrow will move to the left side of the screen. And it's two separate keystrokes, right? Control B is one keystroke, and then your command to Tmux is the second keystroke.
Okay, so now we've got two different panes. So why would this be useful? So let's do a quick example before we do our deeper dive. A lot of times you may want to use this when you're wanting to look at the log output from a file while taking an action in the other pane. So if we do a tail -f, which is a dash follow on var log secure, that'll actually show us any authentication or anything that's happening on the system from an account, a login perspective. And so to demonstrate that, we're going to move over to the other pane to the right, and we're going to do an SSH to localhost. So we're basically logging back into ourselves. And you'll notice as soon as we get connected that it spewed some output there in the left-hand pane. So we can take actions in one and see the results in the other. There's so many more use cases for something like Tmux So why don't we jump into the second half of the show, and we'll talk about what those use cases might be. All right. So let's start simple. We've shown how to do a vertical split. What about a horizontal split? So by default, that key combination is the Control B and the double quotes. So now we can see how we can start to build sort of a grid layout. So if you've got 3 or 4 nodes in like in an application stack or something, you can have, say, an SSH session into each of those, or be looking at a Git repository while writing a playbook and running the playbook. I mean, there's so many different combinations of this. But what if we have, say, multiple applications that we're managing? We can actually use Control B and the letter C to create a whole new window within our session here. So you notice now that we have a 0 and a 1 along our status bar there at the bottom. So that can get really confusing really quick. So if we do a Control B and the comma key, sorry, I had to mentally put my hands on the keyboard, we can actually rename that. We can actually rename the windows. So we can just call it web app or something descriptive that we would know what it is that we were using. So now we've got 0 and 1, and we've got a readable name in those, so we can start to understand what the purpose of each window is, kind of self-documenting, if you will. So to navigate between the windows, it's Control B again, and the 0 key or the 1 key to switch between the two. And you notice that there's a little asterisk next to the active window. So now we're back in Bash, where we're creating new panes within these windows. And we can jump back and forth with the number keys, and you can have multiple windows. I've had Tmux sessions that were even up to like 8 or 9 windows. Do you need that many? No, but is it nice to have? Sometimes.
Yeah, one of the things that I like most about Tmux, and Screen got me hooked on this a long time ago, is that this is an encapsulated session. So normally when you lose a connection to a system or your shell closes, it kills off all the applications that were running within it. But by encapsulating your session in a Tmux, it will survive a disconnection.
That is one of the most powerful features of Tmux. And so we can actually do a detach action. So if we do a Control B and D for detach, oh yeah, let's get something running there in the background.
All right. So you said Control B and D
and
for detach.
Key. Yep. So you notice it says detached from session 0. So just like Windows, we can have multiple sessions running in the background. We can have them open, we can have them active. So you might have one that's for your dev environment, you might have one that's for your production environment, might have one for local systems. Sorry about that. I thought I needed notifications. There we go. So we can actually create a new session and demonstrate this real quick. So let's do a Tmux new -s to give it a name. And then we can also pass in a command. So new session, all one word, and then do a single quote on the top command. And so when we launch it, it'll automatically launch us into a new session, which we're calling new session. And when we connect, it's going to go ahead and run the top command. So the top command, if you aren't familiar, shows us resource utilization on our system, as well as a list of processes. And you notice there across the first line there, it shows that our DD command is running. So not only not only are we in a new session watching system resources, but we can also see that even though we detached from session 0, it's actually still running. So why don't we go ahead and detach from this and reattach to our previous session. So if we do a Control B and D, that'll bring us back to our shell prompt, and then we can do a Tmux attach hyphen session. Or yeah, let's go ahead and list. Sorry, I skipped over that line. If we do a Tmux list sessions, we can see that session 0 has the 2 windows that we created, and new session has 1 window. So we can see that the 2 different ones are running. From there, we can go ahead and do a Tmux attach hyphen session. No space. Sorry. So we do a Tmux attach dash session, and then let's connect back into where our DD process was running. So we do a dash T and a 0. So you see our DD command is still running here in the background. Everything was just as we left it. So if you go home for the day and your workstation is still at the office, or if you're like myself and you shut down your workstation every night, but you don't want to have to reopen all of your sessions every day, I actually have a jump server that I use to connect in either internally or externally to my lab. And so I constantly have that Tmux session running in a background on my jump server, so that my workstation can be shut down at night, or like last week, Scott and I were actually in person for a Red Hat Enterprise Linux meetup. Well, not a meetup, a strategy planning session. And so we actually did Into the Terminal live in person for the first time ever. So I was able to connect back to my home lab even when I was remote, either at a Red Hat office or at the hotel. I could get back into my home network using that jump server and the Tmux session that I have just constantly running in the background. Let's see. So why don't we go ahead and exit out of this? Again, thank you for joining us live. If you have any questions or any use cases, feel free to put them in the chat. We'd love to hear from all of you. So I don't know about you, Scott, but remembering quotation marks and percent signs, that gets kind of... I could have just bit the bullet and learned the keyboard shortcuts that way, but Tmux is actually one of the few utilities that I deviate from the defaults. So to do that, there's blogs all over the internet, and people have Git repos that have different Tmux configuration files that they've used and shared out with folks. So I borrowed this one years ago from somewhere, probably a blog post, and I've kept this with my systems ever since. So we can actually customize how we interact with Tmux using just a configuration file. So we're in our home directory. So if we create a file, a hidden file, so that's the first period, and then tmux.conf. So .tmux.conf, we can actually create customized configurations. So I prefer to use the arrow keys to navigate between panes. So actually, this may be outdated in my configuration file. That may be the standard nowadays. But if we do a bind command, we can actually specify the action we want to take. So in this case, the action we want to take is we want to hit the left arrow to select to do a select pane on left. And then you see right, up, and down in there as well. So if we were to write and save this file and then launch a new Tmux session, we'll actually be able to use the arrow keys to navigate between panes. So if we create like a little four square or something, so we get a few panes in there, we can now just use the arrow keys to move in between all of the different panes. Which to me, Control B left arrow, Control B up arrow, that feels more natural to my workflow. In fact, I also changed the new window, but So now we can use the arrow keys to move between the different panes, and you can see how we could very quickly build up quite an impressive stack of windows and processes.
Yeah, and Eric, I do think that that's the default now, because notice if I just use up and down arrows, it's sending that to the shell. So I still need to preface it with Control B up arrow, Control B down arrow, Control B left, and Control B right. And that's what we were doing before to change focus as well. So I think it is now the default key binding for Tmux.
I can now remove 4 lines from my configuration file. But one I do use and is different is let's see. So in my configuration file, I actually have different bind for splitting windows to use the
Yep.
H and V keys for horizontal and vertical, respectively, which was what I was getting at about percent keys and quotation marks becoming confusing.
Right. So this one, what
And
you're
we'll
saying is when you Control BH, it's a horizontal split, and a Control BV is a vertical split, I think.
yes. So we'll have
Close
to
our
exit our
Tmux.
session and relaunch.
All right. So let's see. Control BH. Oh, you know what we forgot to do?
We forgot to unbind.
I see. Yes, we forgot to unbind. Let's try that. Control BH. Control BV.
Interesting.
Sad trombone.
I don't think. Yeah, we've got all 4 lines in there now. I wonder if it's because we still have that other Tmux session running.
You
I
can
would
see.
think it would apply to any new Tmux sessions, but maybe not.
Tmux. Attach. Session. Oh, that exited my login. Hold on.
Exited too far.
Too many exits. All right. Tmux. Unknown key. Unbind percent.
Interesting. Let me make sure I pulled that out of my configuration file correctly.
I noticed that it does have a. Hold on. I think I see the problem. I didn't copy paste, and I think I
Yes.
missed that.
Yeah, because otherwise a quotation mark would mean something different. So we have to escape that.
BH. There we go.
Hey,
Control
and
B
Control
V.
BV.
There we go.
Love it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you troubleshoot live on air. How about you, Scott? Have you done much with Tmux or Screen even?
So I have to admit that I am a longtime Screen devotee. So when we obsoleted Screen in RHEL 8 and no longer started shipping it, I was forced to learn Tmux. Screen doesn't have all the fancy like split windows, or at least I didn't use it. So like I'm a relative newcomer to Tmux as of the last few years. But the places where I use it are things like you mentioned earlier, troubleshooting, where I can run like a log in one window and do my service or system CTL restart in another and see the output on the other side of it. I know that we use it for building a performance observability dashboard in one of our labs, where we run different performance observability tools in each of the little panes and then we run our application in one pane, and we can kind of see across this like breadth of performance observability tools for things like slow file system, TCP connections, and kind of like get a better profile of what's happening across the app. And in a SSH session, that would be really hard to do without Tmux. Whereas like on a desktop, you could just spin up multiple X terms. But how many of us have desktops running on our servers out there in the world, especially places like the cloud, right? So that's where I mostly use it, is for things like that.
So I noticed in the chat you got a few people that felt your pain and threw their burden in with you. Let's see. So like
I will say that like longer term, Tmux has been more useful, right? Because I just use Screen for a single window and would flip between sessions like we did earlier with Bash and Web App. So like it replaces the functionality, and then I've discovered new functionality in Tmux that was not present in Screen that I also use.
So I started out using Screen for a short time because when I first started running Minecraft servers, the recommended way to do so was to open a Screen session and kick off the Minecraft process, and then you could detach from it, and so it'd just be running in the background. So, but I too discovered Tmux and all the amazing things that came with it. Feel free to throw some comments in the chat if you're using Tmux for something today. In fact, if I pull up my Tmux session right now, I've the active window is actually a vanilla RHEL 9 box that I just use to dabble. If someone asks me, what version is this package in RHEL 9 or something, I could just pull up that pane and just check. So I use that, and then the other pane that I have open right now is it's for Matrix server. I've got a Matrix server that's running on DigitalOcean. I've got a server here at home that I'm trying to move Matrix over to, but Nginx and I don't get along very well, so I'm fighting with that. So I've got like 3 or 4 panes open where I'm comparing configuration files between this one works on DigitalOcean, it's not working here at home, and then I've got like an Ansible playbook that sets up Matrix on everything. So I've got all these panes and log files open. Especially when you've got like a 4K monitor and you can take your Tmux session and take it full screen, and you've got all these windows everywhere. We still have that Tmux session open. Here's a useful tip. So you notice how, granted, this is a small lab window. Notice how we've got three different panes open, and one of them over there in the bottom right is fairly small, and you can only get so many characters of text in there. What if I want to focus in on that? We can actually do a Control B to trigger Tmux, and then the Z key. So if we do a Control B Z, that'll actually take the active pane and blow it up to the full size of our window. So now we've got that capital Z in the status bar. And so if we cat out like /etc/fs tab or just something with a lot of text in it, we can actually read through pretty much the entire file, it looks like. But then if we do a Control B and Z again, you'll notice that yeah, trying to work on the fs tab file in that small of a pane, not helpful. But if you can actually zoom in and maximize that screen. So added bonus, I forgot to add that into the show notes.
Yeah, that was cool. I did want to weigh in on your thoughts about defaults, though. So there's an old Simpsons quote where Homer Simpson says, "The 2 greatest words in the English language, default." And I am a strong believer in that. So like, it's cool that we do a custom RC or a tmux.conf, but and that's great for your own system, right? Because then you can customize it as much as you want. But when you start to get into, hundreds or thousands of systems that you have to manage, trying to copy that data around every single box that you manage is a lot. So I've found that going ahead and biting the bullet and learning the default commands for things actually helps me out long term. I discovered that when I worked as a Red Hat training instructor for a number of years, because every Monday I was setting up 30 boxes and they were all installed from scratch, fresh. And so as much as I would like customize, next Monday, 30 new boxes, all installed from scratch. So yeah, like you could develop a whole bunch of things where you copy data around and you like customize things. But that's just like more technical effort that you take on and drag with you from place to place. So
Right. That's why Tmux is one of the very few services that I actually customize, and I usually only make that change on something like a jump server, something that I know I'll always have access to. But if I were to try and take Tmux and deploy it across 1,000 servers back in like my sysadmin days, it'd just be untenable. Um, which is kind of why I think I've I verbalized the fact that this is one of the very few configuration changes I make. But as a sysadmin and now as part of the RHEL team, I try and use the default straight out of the box as much as possible, just because you never know when you're going to be in a situation where you might be on site at a data center in a production outage situation, and you don't want to. It almost becomes a crutch at that point where it's like, I have all these custom things, they work great, but I'm working on our DMZ that is completely cordoned off from all of my tools and all of my customizations. Now what I do now, how do I interact with the system when the web service is down and I have very important people telling me that the company is losing money because the system's not up. It's it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's nice to have these tools, it's nice to have these shortcuts, but you also can hang yourself with that. So it's a fine balance that you have to make.
yeah, well, it all looks great until it doesn't.
Right. So that's pretty much all the questions out of chat. So with that being said, thank you all for joining us. I told Scott pre-show this was weird. It's like I'm already partway through my day and we're just now sitting down to do Into the Terminal. So it's a bit confused today, but I think this new time slot will work out well. Looks like we had 7 or 8 people joining us live. But this is not concrete. So if this time slot doesn't quite work, let us know. Give us your feedback on the topics, on future show topics, on the new time slot. We hopefully by now we've proven that we're fairly quick on responding to comments or instant messages. So by all means, keep in touch with us. Let us know what you want to hear. Like this content, share it with a friend. I know Tmux is one of those very small utilities that can be overlooked, but there's so much that you can do to make your life easier as a sysadmin. So this is usually the part where I tell you what our next episode is going to be, but I think we may shelve that topic for a minute. We're going to do CLI tips and tricks. We've kind of done that in pieces. But so here's what I'm going to do. Here's some action you all can take with you. Send us your tips. Let us know things that you do on the command line. I know Tmux was one of mine. But if you have things that you use on the command line, if you have some sort of script that you've run, some sort of playbook, anything, if there's a utility out there that you like, send it to us over Twitter. Put us in the comments of this video. And we'll hold that episode for a couple of weeks, and we'll do kind of a mailbag type episode. We'll bring in all your ideas, and we'll put a show together, and we'll have an episode of ITT that is completely audience sourced. All right. With that being said, I think that's everything in the chat. Scott, thank you for joining me, and on behalf of the entire Red Hat Enterprise Linux team, thank you for joining us for Into the Terminal, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.